my name is Mouse, sometimes Andy, or the other way around, who knows anymore, not me. I talk about books and book-related things, and today I will be going over my February wrap-up. Now, I will give the disclaimer that I do in all of my wrap-ups. It is currently February the 26th. I have 2 more days left of February, and there is a strong chance that I finish at least one of the books that I'm currently reading, and I do plan to read a couple of graphic novels before the end of the month. So, just a disclaimer that I may have a few more books at the end of the month than what I go over here. Today we're using a notepad because I wanted to physically write everything down because it helps me remember things. So here we are. In February, I read 39 total books. I read 13,835 pages, 254 hours of books listened, no books purchased. Hell yeah. I did receive books, but they were gifts. I have not purchased any books. 6 library books checked out, and I had a 3.7 average rating. Now this is really interesting because I have started incorporating Cawpile, which is really helping with my rating system as well as my writing reviews. You guys have heard me mention this like 100 times, but it is really helping with that process because normally I had about a 4 to 5 even average rating when it came to my end of the month wrap-ups, and that was a really high rating, and I know that I know what kind of books I like, but it wasn't as honest as it could have been. So this allows for me to have a little bit more honest ratings. When it comes to genres from least to most read, I read 1 contemporary, 1 thriller, 2 horror, 2 romance, 3 sci-fi, 6 graphic novels, 7 retellings, 10 books with LGBTQ+ themes, and 20 fantasy books. I was surprised by how little the sci-fi books were and the horror books. So normally I read a little bit more horror than I do most months, but I will say this month was kind of a slower month compared to my previous months last year. I read 1 physical book, 16 audiobooks, and 22 ebooks. I have a plethora of digital copies of books and audiobooks, and I'm trying to get through all of those before Clear Your Shit this year because I would like to not have a huge list of books for Clear Your Shit, and I would really like to actually clear my shit this year. I read 7 middle grade, 8 adult, and 23 young adult books. I read from authors, 7 neurodiverse authors, 10 people of color, 11 genderqueer, 13 queer, 22 white, and 28 cisgendered. I read 10 of the 39 books I read this month were debut books, so that's really cool. That's a new stat that I'm tracking, and I just think it's really interesting. When it comes to the top 5 books of my wrap-up and the worst books of my wrap-up, I never really know where to start with this, because I know if I talk about the worst books, I will go on a tangent. And if I talk about the best books, people will probably assume I never read them because I have a really hard time with explaining them. I also want to start discussing the books that I DNF, since it was such a thing earlier this month. I want to discuss the books I DNF'd and why, and at what percentage, for transparency's sake. Even though I talk about it in my vlogs, just this way, if this is the only video that you watch of mine, you know what I'm doing when it comes to tracking my book. For the best books that I read this month and recommend highly, it's going to be Surrender Your Sons by Adam Sass. This is a thriller that is also set in a conversion therapy camp. Knowing people that probably would have been sent to a conversion therapy camp. So it was the only thriller that emotionally wrecked me. I felt so strongly and so heavily for these characters that I couldn't think about anything. Like, I just couldn't read anything else after reading Surrender Your Sons. The next one is Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. I kind of like buddy read this with Art. Basically, we just read it at the same time, and I yelled, and it was her second time reading and my first, second or third time reading. I don't know how many times Art's read Legendborn. Legendborn, we follow this girl who basically goes to college after her mother's death and finds out that she has some kind of magic, and she interacts with this like old boys secret society situation, and there's a lot of racism and prejudice that are very normal in these southern secret societies. I can't speak to the northern ones because I am not from the north. Secret societies, and sororities and fraternities and that kind of thing. Greek life often, it's really common for Greek life to have a quote-unquote token person of color or queer identity or that kind of thing to look really good on some of the documentation that they have to provide. The only reason I know this information is that my previous relationship was with somebody who was in a fraternity, and I was a part of their stuff for 4 years. So I know quite a bit about Greek life and don't agree with most of it. There are some exceptions to this generalized statement. Of course, I'm not trying to hurt anybody's feeling. I do think we should abolish Greek life, but Legendborn just really further encouraged that mindset for me. But the way that it addresses generational trauma and that kind of thing and puts it through a fantasy lens that is still realistic because it's a real thing that people go through, but also tangible for people who maybe don't want to have those conversations and look at those things. It puts this in this fantasy mindset and allows people to actually think about it. I don't know. I just know some people won't read a fantasy book or wouldn't read a contemporary book with these themes because they suck. But they're more likely to read a fantasy book with these themes, which would cause them to think. So I think that's really interesting, and I think that Tracy Deonn did an amazing job with this book. It's also just a really good book in general. Outside of those themes, outside of everything, the writing's fantastic, the characters are great, and the way that the magic in the world works is explained in an incredibly good way. The next book is All the Bad Apples by Moira Fowley Doyle. This book, it touches on I don't know a lot of the history because I am from the United States, but the Irish homes for mothers and babies where young women were pregnant outside of wedlock or whatever and got sent away and then came back, and all of a sudden, oh, your mom has just had a baby, don't ask questions. It was around that, but also magic and the history of all of it and ongoing family curses, and it was really interesting. I finished it in one day, kind of devoured it while working, and I thought the writing was really well done. There were moments where I was a little confused, but it's because it references these letters of previous family history and how they relate to what's currently going on. But all in all, it was a really good book, especially if you're somebody who has some kind of religious trauma. I think that conversation is really interesting. How many times am I going to call things interesting? I don't know. I should pick better adjectives at some point. For the two arcs, the first arc that I'm going to recommend and say is in my top 5 is The Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. This book did come out in January, but I got approved it this month, so I read and reviewed it. It is a vampire polyamorous book that touches on abuse. I will say extreme trigger warnings, obviously for blood and bloodlust, but extreme trigger warnings for emotional abuse if this is something that you can't read about and will upset you. I will fair warn for that. I'm fine with reading those kinds of things, and I think that the way that Gibson wrote about it actually is realistic, even though it's a vampire book, right? It's realistic in that so often the abused do adore and love their abuser, and it's a really hard place to be in when you want to leave and you can't, but there's also part of you that always still loves them and wants to pretend or lie to yourself that the bad things aren't happening or that you deserve them, and so on. And so there's this ongoing conversation of abuse and also love and smut and vampires, and it was really good. I think that it could be this generation's Interview with a Vampire, genuinely. Also, the writing is incredibly lush and beautiful. I think I was highlighting words every other page, basically, because I was so obsessed. So the next arc that I'm going to recommend is The Murmuring Bones by A.G. Slatter. This is a gothic fantasy horror. I don't want to spoil the book, so it's going to be a little bit tricky to talk about it, but essentially our main character has always lived in this one particular home with her family, and the family is known for being strange, and they essentially always sacrifice one child to the ocean or to mermaids. Someone made a deal with a mermaid and many moons ago, and the family has just been paying for it generation after generation. So it is one part that story and one part our main character escaping her betrothed who is abusive and just wants the money and the land. So it's really intricate and beautiful while also being kind of terrifying and fantastic. The gore is not that bad, so if you are someone who's hesitant about things that are really gory, I would say that the gore doesn't get too bad, and really the goriest bit happens at the very end. So the worst books that I read this month were, one was an ARC and the other was the first book in that trilogy that the second book I received is in, and it is the Once and Future Queen trilogy by Clara O'Connor. I will not be reading the third book. The first book is Secrets of the Star-Crossed, and the second book is Curse of the Celts. The reason this was the worst books I have read, probably ever, is the way that the author addresses consent is absolutely not okay. So in Curse of the Celts, we follow Cassandra, who is 22 but reads like she's 16 and sometimes reads like she's 14. She throws temper tantrums, stomps her foot at people when she's angry, which I'm pretty sure if I saw an adult do that, I would be like, I'm gonna need you to leave. Like, you're too grown for that. She has known this one particular person since she was 12, thinking that person was 12, Devin, and it actually turns out he was 16 and she was 12, and he had been following her thinking she was this long-lost daughter of the Lady of the Lakes. This is going to be spoiler crazy, but I don't want you guys to read these books. So they have a 4-year age difference, which when you're 22 and 26, that's not too bad, but knowing that he's known her since he was a 16-year-old posing as a 12-year-old makes it a little weird. So they get romantically involved even though she is betrothed to someone named Marcus. This society is through the lens that Rome never fell. However, they've always been fighting the Britons, which is the Celts, and that Arthur, King Arthur, and the Round Table and everything still happened. And that doesn't historically make sense. Now, I'm not a history person, and I was able to catch that. I don't know anything about history, and even I was like, I don't think this is how history would have worked. Maybe I'm wrong, though. No, I wasn't wrong. When it comes to the relationships, this is also in the future. There's technology and everything, but women are still, purity culture is still really strong. There's a lot of shame around sex, and Cassandra is just a sex pawn piece in the entire series because that is all women amount to. If I can find the tweet that this series made me think of, I'll put it here. I'm hoping Editing Me can find it. It's in the blog post that we wrote about this, so hopefully. Marcus is her betrothed, and on the day before her hand fasting, which is when they get cuffed with these weird technology thingies that keep them from wandering away from one another, Cassandra is given bridal tea by her mother. The bridal tea makes her more sexually aroused, so she is drugged without her consent and then goes to Devin. They both know she's drugged. She explains she's drugged. This entire book, he has been like, no, we can't kiss. She has been like, no, we can't kiss. And it's all because of the betrothal and their relationship and blah, 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 blah. Purity all the way around. But when she's drugged without her consent, that's when they have their first physical relations. The bridal tea is used again in the second book for Devin, and essentially the same thing occurs without Devin's consent. And then I'm going to spoil the ending. Alright, let's spoil the ending of book 2. First off, in the entire series, Marcus is an incredibly kind person. He's a doctor and he wants to help people. At the end of the second book, you find out that I guess Marcus decided fuck everybody and betrays everyone and leaves. So Marcus has abandoned Cassandra. Cassandra is pregnant and Devin has just been murdered. Cassandra's pregnant with Devin's child. All in the same 5-10 minutes. Devin dies, Marcus betrays her and sails away, and when they get separated, those hand-fasting cuffs really, really hurt. They cause her so much physical pain that she could die. They know that if she gets married, the cuff should fall off because it's a contractual agreement. And so she then marries someone, Gideon, who she has hated this entire book. They get married, and the cuff doesn't fall off. Turns out they have to consummate the marriage. So she has to make the decision to either die or consummate the marriage with someone who doesn't want to have sex with her, and she doesn't want to have sex with them. So neither party is really consenting. The entire thing is surrounded by shame and grief, and that's the end of the book. She has to make that decision. I found that disgusting. We're in 2021, you have full capability of writing she's considered one of the most powerful magical family lines in existence. She has shown that she can control the weather, but she can't get a hand-fasting technology thing off of her and instead has to experience this incredibly shameful sexual experience. This is a young adult novel. Teenagers are supposed to read this. Absolutely not. I would not let my teenager read this. would not be okay with it at all. So that was my issue with the book. It made me really upset. It is what it is. Now then, for my DNFs, and then we'll close this video out. I feel like I've gone on for a really long time. I DNF'd one arc and 2 other books. The arc that I DNF'd was Isol DC. I DNF'd it around 40-50%. I DNF'd it because there were like 12 characters all mentioned by name and it was too confusing and I couldn't remember what anybody was doing. Also, the blurb made it seem like it was a fantasy book, but it was actually sci-fi, and that was weird. The second book that I DNF'd was Girls of Storm and Shadow, which is 50%. That is the sequel to Girls of Paper and Fire. I don't even know why I read the sequel. I knew I didn't like the first book. So when I read the sequel, I was super bored. Super bored. So I just DNF'd it. I decided this isn't worth it and I don't care anymore. The next book that I DNF'd was Lobizona at about 90%. I had maybe 30 minutes left of the audiobook. That book just devolved into being about sports. And I don't care about sports, but that's it. Those are all the books that I've read this year. This month, not this year. I hope you guys are having a great day. Don't forget to take care of yourselves. If you liked this video, don't forget to like and subscribe and share. If you didn't like it, sorry about it. I will catch you guys on Thursday at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time or Tuesday at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. Okay, thanks, bye.